Good morning, President Vitale, Vice President Ruiz, and members of the board. I present to you today for your approval a new physical education policy. The Illinois School Code requires that students receive daily physical education in both elementary and high school, with limited exceptions of individual student waivers and excused absences. The Chicago Public Schools currently holds a waiver that's been issued by the state to excuse our students in 11th and 12th grade from daily physical education without the need to request an individual student waiver. CPS has had this waiver since 1997, and it expires at the end of this school year in June of 2014. As such, this fall, all schools, all high schools, must have students scheduled into daily physical education. The district elected not to renew this waiver in November of 2011, and therefore this proposed policy will establish the planning requirements for our high schools as they transition scheduling in anticipation of the waiver expiring, as well as provide guidance for our elementary schools to adjust their scheduling and programming to meet the requirements of the policy. It sets standards through which physical education will be provided to students to ensure that they are physically literate. And it will also establish the requirements for 11th and 12th grade students to individually request a waiver from daily physical education as permitted by the Illinois School Code. Currently, our 9th graders receive 1 semester of PE and 1 semester of health, and our 10th graders receive 1 semester of PE and 1 semester of driver's education. Our elementary schools average about 60 minutes of physical education per week. With passage of this policy, our elementary schools will provide 30 minutes of physical education per day, or an equivalent of 150 minutes per week. And all high school grades will be scheduled into daily physical education. Additionally, health education will meet the requirement for physical education at grades 5 and above. To support this successful incorporation of this policy and into their instructional programming, all schools will develop an action plan that outlines the metrics and steps they will take to ensure full policy implementation with fidelity by the year 2016-17. So, the policy will set standards for high quality PE, set the minute requirements on the instruction, be inclusive of all diverse learners, abilities, fitness levels, ethnicities, and genders. It'll provide supports for our teachers as well as instructional tools. It'll identify the individual student waivers that are allowed by the school code, and it will outline the oversight and implementation. It'll outline the oversight and accountability for the policy implementation. PE is instruction time. It's not recess, it is an academic course, and it's been shown to enhance the learning of other core content. It follows a standards-based curriculum. It maximizes moderate to vigorous physical activity. And if you look to the right lower column, you see 2 brains floating there. Physical education and physical activity actually increase the blood flow to the brain, which increases the focus of students. So after 20 minutes of physical activity, you see an increase in capacity to learn. And studies have actually shown that students engaged in physical activity prior to their most challenging coursework have been able to see a grade increase, a full letter grade increase in their achievement over their counterparts not engaged. So we know that there is definitely an impact to physical education. This policy, in full candor, represents a culture change and one of a great magnitude and significance for our district, and it's not without its challenges or impact. We have, in order to understand what the potential challenges to implementation were, we have researched other school districts, we've implemented pilots at the elementary and high school level, we've reviewed internal data, including site plans, facilities use reports, school schedules, staff allocations, and assignments. And we've identified 4 major challenges: space, staffing, and programming challenges like scheduling and equipment. And we have also been informed by our research and our focus groups and our pilots on what strategies we can utilize to overcome these so that our district can be where it needs to be for this policy. Our principals will be faced, however, with ongoing prioritization decisions as they roll out their schedules for the new year. And one of the things we've done as a part of the supports is build out procedural guidance that outlines for principals in partnership with other departments in the district, in central office, as well as with arts, how to maximize the offerings of these other courses that support the core, as well as ensure that everyone gets what they need for have a well-rounded education. Yesterday, as Mario just referenced, the mayor's office announced tax incremental financing surplus to be directed towards schools for both the arts and physical education. And these funds will offset the costs for 84 teachers over the next 2 years in physical education, which will allow some of our schools, or some of our high schools facing the greatest challenges, to craft out a detailed and thoughtful and strategic plan for the next 2 years to bridge that gap so that we're meeting the policy in full fidelity by 2016. Additionally, this past fall, the United States Department of Education awarded our district $2.25 million to support physical education in this institutionalizing it in the district as we bring it back, as well as building an infrastructure to support our teachers. So I mentioned a few of the challenges. I'll touch on them briefly. We look at a combination of both school level and central office strategies to support our schools in meeting the letter of the policy. And we know that at the level of staffing, allowing students to take dance and allowing dance to account for both PE and arts credit, it will be one way to ameliorate the demand of PE teachers. Additionally, we're working with our talent office on recruitment efforts, as physical education is a high needs position for this district. Over the last 20 years, the near 20 years that we've been without physical education, there's been a decreased demand. And so now that we have potentially this policy going ahead, the demand will increase. We have a high needs position which waives the residency requirement for our physical educators and opens the pool up of those that we can hire for the role, as well as being able to offer additional classes for those at the high school level. As we look at space, ideally physical education occurs in the gymnasium space. However, it doesn't have to occur there to be quality, and we can utilize and leverage other rooms within the schoolhouse, the classrooms, multi-purpose rooms, the use of auditoriums to conduct physical education. And as we look to scheduling, we want to be really cognizant of, as principals are making decisions, how this impacts the other coursework that our students are offered. And again, looking for a well-rounded education. We want them to maximize as many offerings as possible. So we've looked at, and this has really been informed by a lot of the pilots, the ability to integrate other topics into the classroom so that you don't lose your minutes for your special preps at the elementary school level. And options at the high school level include offering physical education and health courses at an honors level to ensure that this honors and AP programming is still available, as well as there's always the option to expand the school day with a 0 or a 9th period. Equipment is accounted for in our student-based budgeting and in that formula for schools, and we're maximizing the opportunities where physical educators are able to share amongst themselves. We've built out networks, as well as we've created a list of what schools should have, or we're doing a sourcing plan to ensure that we can do bulk ordering to provide that for our schools. So we have prioritized our schools based on what we see those challenges to be, and we've tailored the supports for each individual school to meet them. And so as we look at our supports and action plans, there are a combination of things to highlight, but the 4 big caveats are that there'll be supports for all schools. We've built out procedural guidance. There's a help desk that'll be available. We've tailored trainings that are available right now in the Knowledge Center, as well as we'll be on site meeting with schools to work through how this happens over the next, as they do their action planning to ensure this policy implementation over the next 3 years. Additionally, elementary schools will increase their level of offering of physical education by 30 minutes each week over the next 3 years, and leveraging health education, because health education can count up to 60 minutes of PE time. At the high school level, all high school students will be scheduled into physical education come this fall. The only exceptions will be those who meet the allowable individual student waivers. And the accountability is that we'll be looking at all the action plans for schools. We'll be following and tracking to ensure the schools are on track for meeting the outcomes that they've set for themselves that work with the confines of their needs and the constraints of their circumstances. And so we'll be tailoring supports to meet that and address that and work with them and reporting back on that to you as well. And so as we look at the policy implementation, the real focus right now for this school year is about the communications and the outreach. We've created a significant communication plans for all stakeholders because we need to start as soon as we get the go to move forward with this. We need to inform our principals. We need to meet with parents and families and have them to know what the expectations are. And we need to start coordinating our visits such that we can help our schools in their planning process as the planning calendar has opened currently. As well, 2014-15 represents our implementation and professional development. We'll be working with schools and administrators around best practices and doing technical assistance in the upcoming years. And again, the year of 2016-17 is really about oversight and accountability. As we've categorized schools, we know that some schools are better prepared to go, and others will require more time to be at 100% full fidelity. And that's how we'll be working with schools to get them all at the goal line at 2016 when we're fully implementing physical education with full fidelity. This plan was not done in a bubble. We engaged over 500 different stakeholders, including teachers, administrators, parents, academics, and partners from numerous organizations highlighted here. I'll call out 5, the American Heart Association, the Consortium to Lower Obesity in Chicago Children, Healthy Schools Campaign, MICFA Challenge, and the Illinois Association of Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance. We're all critical partners in reviewing not only best practices, but working with the district on establishing the right metrics and goals for moving forward. And additionally, we've had our policy reviewed by Yale University, the Rudd Center for Food Policy and Obesity, which reviews wellness policies from across the nations, and in most school districts, the physical education policy is contained within the wellness policy, and we've received high marks for what this actually represents and the great impact it'll have on the lives of our students. I'd be remiss as a physician if I didn't talk about the health impacts, but also we know health impacts academics and the ability to support our other academic offerings.
Thank you, Stephanie. Questions, comments from board members for Stephanie?
I have a couple questions. Dr. White, you know I have continuing concerns about our ability to implement this, so I just have a couple questions. You mentioned this is a culture change, and one of the things that I'm worried about when we implement is that we underestimate the impact. So this is a little bit more than a culture change. We're making a policy change here that is elevating physical education, and in a limited resource environment, when you do that, there will be some impacts. So we will indeed lose some academic class time to PE. So one, I want to make sure that that's an accurate statement, and if it is, I'd like you to just give us some groundwork for why you think that's the right choice for us to make from a policy perspective.
Sure. So I would make one clarification. Physical education is instruction time. It is an academic course. And so when I speak to the culture shift, that is a part of it. For so long, it's been kind of put to the side and not thought of as being, because it's not core reading, writing, arithmetic, probably shouldn't use the 3 R's, but because it's not core in that content, that it doesn't have value. And it does, both for establishing the appropriate fitness standards and lifelong fitness for students, but it also enhances, as research has shown, the other core content areas by focusing the classroom, increased student achievement, as well as decreasing behavior concerns and reports in the classroom as well. I believe it's the right thing for our district to do for those very reasons. And if you look at some of the other high achieving schools in the area, whether it's Naperville, whether it's New Trier, or what have you, those students are doing it, and they're doing it with daily physical education. So the impact of having physical education as a core academics course will actually, I think, enhance, and we'll look at these outcomes, and with our federal grant, we'll be able to study the outcomes on academics as well.
Thank you. We talked about staffing, and we're going to get some funding to support that. A couple questions. Where do we have concerns about the pool of potential PE or teachers who can teach this, given the number when we get to, I know there's time, but even with that, my understanding is that there's some constraints on the pool of teachers that would be available to teach this. What are we doing about that?
So again, we're working with our talent office, who is a wonderful sourcing plan of meeting, doing job fairs, and other initiatives as well. But I think part of it is to understand that we haven't had the need for physical education teachers in this capacity. So once the policy passes, if the policy passes and we're able to say we need you, then that opens the door, especially because, one, the residency requirement was not well known for many. So we opened the door not only to people who live in Chicago, but outside the Chicagoland area, in which there are numerous physical education programs. We've began a partnership with physical teacher educators, and so they're aware of that we've been working towards enhancing physical education, and our recruitment efforts have been at that level, as well as going to national physical education meetings. We also have a pool of over 140 certified physical educators within Chicago Public Schools who are not currently staffed in physical education roles.
Okay. Lastly, you mentioned communication. I can't speak for the rest of the board, but I have received calls from principals who are not fully informed about this policy or how it's going to be implemented. So can you talk a little bit more about what we're going to do to make sure that our principals, because one of the concerns I have is that we ask so much from them.
We do.
And we put so many constraints on what they can and cannot do. So can you talk to me a little bit about what's in place for communicating, and then give me some greater comfort than I currently have that we're going to make sure that they are engaged and we give them some room to do what they have to do and still implement this policy?
Excellent question, board member Zopp. So we have actually set up a complete communications plan where we are just waiting for go to reach out via memo from the CEO to let them be aware of the fact that the policy has passed, what it entails, as well as the webinars that we've already done that are 5 to 10 minute webinars that goes through each facet of the policy, how to implement physical education, as well as providing the information for the help desk that contacts my office either via email or calls. We're scheduled to meet on the network schedule for Monday to get out with our network chiefs to provide this information for them. We'll be making the rounds at our network chief principal meetings when they all gather together to present this information as well. And key and critical, as we've classified our schools based on their readiness to implement, those who have the greater challenges are the ones that we will get to first and foremost, but we will hit every high school in the next 2 months of sitting and meeting with the principal, going through what the policy looks like, what action planning should look like for them, what's feasible, and what other options are. We've began that work. We've had some great feedback. They've appreciated some of the ideas we've brought to the table, informed by our pilots and some of the research that we've done. So it's full court press ahead.
Lastly, if we see more challenges than you anticipate with this implementation policy, would you be willing to consider an amendment to the implementation plan, either an extension or some way to give our schools and particularly our principals some room to get this done if it's not working the way we anticipate?
That is also an excellent question. Thank you. So the way the plan is set up right now is that as schools tailor their own plan based on their own set of circumstances, they're setting their metrics and their steps along the way. So what we like to do, what we will do, is follow along with them to ensure that that happens. If we're noticing that we're falling behind on the targets that you've set, we're going to figure out what other supports we can bring around that. We'll also be monitoring what percentage of schools that is. If there was a great percentage of schools who are having significant challenges and it could not be done, then anyone would need to definitely reassess the plan as we move forward. We feel pretty confidently that we've researched it, we've done the work, we have a good sense in our conversations with focus groups and with principals about this can happen. Again, it's not without impacts, and I don't mean to minimize that, but I think as we take a stance as a district that we do think that physical education is important, we do think that arts are important, we do know both what the research supports arts and physical education in the schools and how it supports the other core content areas, this becomes a part of how we work with them. So building out the supports on the foreground to go meet with them has been critically important, and that's what we've spent these last few months doing to ensure that we had.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, and I would just add, I think Andy covered most of the questions, but I would add a slightly different way. If we see, I mean, clearly, Dr. White, you're saying that almost every principal will need to make decisions around resources, and so it is likely something will need to come off the table to put PE on the table, right? I mean, that's almost likely to be a decision that every principal has to make. And so if as you're rolling out the implementation and we find that because I think one of the things I'm uncomfortable with is that we haven't been able to vet deeply enough to know what exactly, I've gotten a bunch of emails too, were we having to take away the technology program to put in so we actually aren't at the school level where we know what kinds of decisions principals are going to be having to make, and they are having to make so many decisions on any given day. If those decisions begin to look, make us all, are we able to pull back on implementation? Is that a trigger that will allow you to sort of rethink implementation, not just that we aren't hitting the milestones on the physical education plan?
Well, we definitely want to roll the policy out and roll it out with success and provide the supports to ensure success. If as we begin, there are significant challenges, if they appear insurmountable, we definitely need to take another look at what's going on and if the trajectory needs to be prolonged and how that can happen or occur. So we need to be open to that. I'd like to say, though, that through some of the pilot work that we've done, we've seen the ability of schools to say, you use technology as an example, leverage technology in the classroom so that wasn't lost as one of the preps or specials that students actually experienced and had success with. So again, using some of the strategies that we've been informed by through the pilots, through what other school districts are doing, and what we've even heard other principals share, I think will help as we collect these best practices and share them out.
I have a question.
Okay.
Thank you. How will this affect juniors and seniors who are getting ready for post-secondary with their core courses or advanced placement or honors, or will this affect them in any way?
It will not affect their core courses. At the high school level, there's an average of 7 electives that students get over the course of 4 years. With the reinstitution of physical education, they will have an average of 5 electives that they'll be able to choose from.
So you don't anticipate it will affect any of their scholarship
We've seen with scheduling that if a student wanted to take 10 AP courses and graduate with 28 credits, they're still able to do so and do so with 4 years of physical education.
And have we projected an anticipated number of positions with certified physical education teachers as a result of the implementation of this policy, new positions that will be required?
Yeah, so what we've done is looked at, based on total enrollment, not factoring in JORTC, which is an automatic exemption, or any other waivers, what the maximal enrollment, if every student is in physical education, looks like to project staffing model. So we have that for each school, and as we sit down and work with them, we'll be able to work out what actually looks right for their building. But that is also where the recently announced TIF funds will be helpful for schools who their staffing projections look high, and then they're able to offset that with the funding and plan over the next 2 years for how they'll be able to fully do it themselves in 3 years.
Thank you.
Yes. I have a couple of concerns. like, when I look on the back of this with all the external support, and you state that you had various focus groups, I'm really concerned about the principals and teachers who were involved. Maybe sometime we need to list them, because I don't see them. And many times, it's been my experience that these programs were handed down to us. And if you have been having focus groups, why don't the principals even know about what's going on? I understand what you're saying about you're waiting until it passed, but if you've even been doing pilot programs, the informal network works really well among principals and teachers. So I'm concerned that they aren't even aware of this. That's the first thing. And I'd like to know just how many principals and teachers, PE teachers or teachers were, not the numbers, but just how many were actually involved in this. And then my second question is, if I read this correctly, this program is supposed to be implemented at 66 cents per child?
No,
Well, what
that
does that
is
say?
the student-based budgeting allotment for
Right.
PE equipment
Okay.
and supplies.
Okay, so even when I take that for equipment and supplies for 500 kids, as a principal, you're gonna give me $330 to implement this? You can tell by my tone I wouldn't be happy. And the third thing is the action plan that you are giving to the schools, to their own action plan that we created, right? That
No.
management created. Who created the action plan?
The schools will create their own action plans. We
Who
have a
created
template
the
for them.
format for the
Oh,
action
we
plan?
did.
It's been my experience
We did,
that I was
yes.
given a fill-in sheet to fill in according to your guidelines. I want to know how many teachers and principals sat on that committee to help determine that format.
Okay. Question one was, how many?
On the focus groups. Tell me about the focus group. How many
So-
teachers and principals was
So
in
we
those
did multiple
groups?
focus groups as a part of our Minds in Motion, which we call the PE strategy. And we called them together to outline the vision around what physical education will look like. I can provide you a number, like get it for you and provide
Just
you a number.
estimate, how many teachers and principals were involved in those
It was
focus
over
groups?
500 stakeholders. I would say that 40% of that had to be represented, if not half, were represented by principals and teachers. We've been working for the last 2 years with our physical educators via a leadership team, and they've helped design the scope and sequence and build out the curriculum maps that we're using for physical education. The pilots were limited to 27 elementary schools and 6 high schools. I understand your concern about the informal network of the information getting out, and it's partially a part of the informal network where there's a little bit of misinformation out currently about what physical education will represent for the district, and which is kind of fueling a little bit of the concern. So we are ready to go and address those and really have that conversation. It is concerning. It's scheduling time right now, so there's anxiety around what does physical education mean. So I appreciate your principal lens, Dr. Hines, and how you're coming forward. The other piece on, there were 4 questions.
And teacher Lynn too, because they're the ones who have to implement this,
Correct.
okay?
The third question, I'm sorry, I couldn't keep them all.
66 cent,
The 66 cent is the student-based budgeting allotment that is already set up for student-based budgeting for PE equipment.
okay? And I just say realistically, if I had 500 kids, you expect me to buy an ample amount of equipment with
So-
$330.
So as we talk about physical education and we talk about being able to provide the quality physical education, there are supplies that you need, correct? Do you need 1 ball per each student in the classroom? Not necessarily. And what we know is that you can get a lot done with a little. And depending on the skill of what you're doing or how, whatever the learning standard is of that class that day, the impacts will be different But again, we have pulled together a best practice list of what equipment should be in schools, and we are looking at a sourcing plan to address vendors to buy in bulk to be able to distribute for schools. A part of the funding for the Carol M. White Physical Education Grant that we got for the Department of Education does a lot for some PE supplies, so we're looking at options to help bring that together and be able to support schools.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Slightly different take. I just wanted to commend your hard work and just remind folks that, this is state law. We've basically been, skirting state law for 17 years. And so I'm glad, having sat in the body that used to, approve these things begrudgingly, I'm glad that we're finally going to be abiding by state law. That districts like the district you mentioned, Northbrook did the study with Harvard University that
Yes.
found if you do PE before a difficult calculus test, you're going to perform better.
Yes.
So schools in Illinois like Northbrook, I think Chicago students deserve that same privilege to have those opportunities for daily PE. So thank you.
I agree. Thank you, Vice President Ruiz.
So, Stephanie, thank you very, very much. I would just say to you and to Mario, frankly, I don't believe there's anybody on this board that doesn't believe that arts and physical education are an important component of the education of our children. We all agree with that. We all want it for our children, and we think it's beneficial to their outcome. We sit here worried about the financial implications of change. We also worry about the implementation of change. These are significant changes. I appreciate the fact that you're willing to phase them in over time, because change is very difficult in a system of our size, particularly with the financial constraints under which we work. But so I think what you're hearing is we need to monitor the implementation plan closely. We obviously get a lot of feedback, not from you, but from people who have to implement. And so what we're saying is you need to listen closely, because we're listening closely to how we implement this and what its impacts are on our schools and our school leaders. So, but thank you for your effort, and we appreciate all the work that's gone into the policy.
Thank you,
Thank
President Vitale. I neglected to say, in the policy, there is oversight requirement that we report biannually to the board on the progress.
Thank you.